2005 AP Micro number 2, which is obviously an indirect tax question. All right, so the graph above shows the markets for a good that is subject to a per unit tax. The letters in the graph represent the enclosed area. Using the labeling on the graph, identify each of the following: the equilibrium price and quantity before the tax. Easy enough, right? The original price was 12 and the quantity was 100. The area representing the consumer surplus before the tax. Consumer surplus is everything above the price but below the demand curve. So it's all AB, ABCF. Area representing producer surplus before the tax. Looks like it's DGE. Producer surplus is everything below the price but above the supply curve. Let's come back to B. B just needs a little bit more explanation. Let's do C here. Using the labeling on the graph, identify each of the followings after the imposition of the tax. Imposition obviously means after the tax is imposed. What we know is that the tax shifts supply to the left. We know we have a new price that our buyer pays. Price the buyer pays. We have a new quantity. We come down where we hit that lower supply curve, we bounce to the left. This represents the price that the seller would receive or put in his pocket. This whole wedge in here, a rectangle, is government revenue. They are asking us to, using the labeling, the net price received by the seller, we would just say $11. The amount of tax revenue is the area BCD. I would want to calculate this also. All right, we can know that the tax is $2. We can see that because that vertical distance between these two curves, these two supply curves, is the amount of tax. So it's a $2 tax, and they sold 80. So 2 times 80, which would have been 160, is the government's revenue. The area representing the new consumer surplus after the tax is just A. Again, everything above the price, that's the new price, right? Everything above the price but below the demand curve. So our new consumer surplus is A, and the area representing the deadweight loss. Remember, we need to have a good definition for deadweight loss for the College Board. It is a loss of consumer surplus and producer surplus. Can we see that we've lost from that original equilibrium point some consumer surplus and some producer surplus, right? Society is worse off because it has less quantity of this good. We could say deadweight loss is a loss of total welfare. Or we could say it's a loss of total surplus, right? We are worse off as society because we have less of this good. Easy enough. And we would just label that deadweight loss as F and G. All right. Let's talk about B here for just a second. And I'm going to get rid of some of this here because it's a little all over the place. Now, recognize that, let's just read it first. Assume the tax is now imposed based on the graph. Does the price paid by the buyer rise by the full amount of the tax? We can see that the original price was 12, and we can see that the price now is 13. So we see that the tax or the price only rose by $1. But we have a tax. The tax was $2. So we can see that it does not rise by the full amount of the tax. So no, and that gets you 1 point. Recognize that when we have that new quantity and we show our area of government revenue here, we can also see which part is paid by the consumer. Consumers pay this part of the tax, and producers pay this part of the tax. So they've split the tax in this situation, and that's why they say, does the price paid by the buyer rise by the full amount of the tax? We would say, no, it does not. The way they would like you to explain this is that if demand, what we know is, if demand is perfectly inelastic and there's a tax, supply shifts to the left, S plus tax, just like what we have over here. But we know that because demand is perfectly inelastic, when demand is perfectly inelastic, that consumers will pay all of the tax. Understand that as their demand is perfectly inelastic, the quantity that they buy does not change. It doesn't move from that spot. So even if the price goes way up, they're still going to buy that same amount of quantity. So only in a situation where demand was perfectly inelastic would consumers pay all of the tax. Right? In this situation, demand is not. We could sort of use it as a negative explanation. We could say demand is not perfectly inelastic. Therefore, consumers and producers split the tax. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. All right. Take care, guys. Be safe.